He's going to entertain us a whole lot more next week. David!
I'm not a poet. I'm really not. My name's David Jaggard. I write a regular humor column on ParisUpdate.com, ParisUpdate.com, ParisUpdate.com.
Sorry, excuse me, David. What was it called?
I'll tell you afterwards. And I'm going to read out, but tonight I'm going to read a piece from ParisUpdate.com, about the history of France. Very serious about the history of France. A slice of death, chasing the shadow of the guillotine in Paris. A few weeks ago, I was walking by the Place de la Concorde and happened to notice a young couple who seemed to be wandering aimlessly around the pedestrian areas of the square, pointing and staring in every direction with a disoriented look on their faces. Lost tourists. As I was crossing Avenue Gabriel near the Hotel de Crillon, they approached me and asked for help. Specifically, what they asked was, this is true by the way, "Where is the guillotine?" Their question wasn't stupid, it was just 220 years too late. The guillotine was, in fact, a fixture on the Place de la Concorde for a time during the Revolution, and that was where Louis XVI and his wife, I think her name was Mary something, and anyway, they met their respective fates there on January 21st and October 16th, 1719, as a means of humane execution. The phrase may seem oxymoronic today, but before the guillotine, the available options for offing offenders included breaking on the wheel, drawing and quartering, and burning at the stake, any one of which makes swift decapitation seem like a UNICEF program. Guillotine outlined the concept, the prisoners strapped onto a plank with a heavy blade falling between the two uprights, etc. But the actual R&D was handled by a German engineer named Tobias Schmidt, based on a design by a certain Antoine Louis. Nonetheless, the name of the good doctor remained associated with the device. Apparently, guillotine was considered a nicer sounding trademark than Schmidt-Louis. The idea was, properly used, the contraption would dispatch the prisoner quickly, and Guillotin was convinced, painlessly, this is a quote, causing only the sensation of a sudden chill on the back of the neck. He must have figured that by the time the blade got to the front of the neck, it'd be warm. So, it is a little known fact that Schmidt was the actual unsung co-inventor of the guillotine, which he tested on some sheep and then cadavers of stout, stocky men as a sort of a dress rehearsal. And Schmidt's creativity didn't stop there. An even lesser known fact is, as a result of these experiments, he also invented rubber boots and gloves, the squeegee mop, paper towels, and the expression, "Ew, gross!" The perfection of this appalling appliance came just in time to make a spectacular contribution to the barbarity of the Revolution. It was set up in 1792 at what is now called the above-mentioned Place de la Concorde. I can't get my pages unstuck. Hey, fine ahead. And but what was then Place de la Concorde was then called Place de la Révolution, because before then it had been called Place Louis XV, which nobody wanted anymore, and it was there used to bisect the king, the queen, and an impressive roster of royals and old regime sympathizers through 1793. By which time the bloodshed was about to reach flood alert levels. France in early 1794 was ruled by Maximilien de Robespierre, a revolutionary zealot who became the de facto head of the main governing council. Called the Committee of Public Safety, it essentially did its best to ensure that no member of the public was ever safe. All enemies, real or perceived, of the new government were summarily put to death by guillotine. Understandably, everyone was on edge, out of the very real fear that an edge would soon be on them, which is why this period is called the Reign of Terror. In June of that grim year, the committee dispensed with the need for witnesses at treason trials. Merely being accused of anti-revolutionary activity, thought, or presumably dreams, was enough to send a suspect to what the British by that time were calling the Continental Divider. Not surprisingly, this measure gave the old bean harvester a real workout. From June 14th to July 27th, there's actually some real facts in here, believe it or not. It was erected at the Place du Trône, which is now Place de la Nation, and used to denogonize no fewer than 1,306 alleged enemies of the people. That's more than 30 gruesome public executions per day. The details vary from account to account, but one source gives the age range of those killed as 14 to 90, which raises the question, what exactly could a 14-year-old and a 90-year-old do to warrant execution as counter-revolutionaries? Did the teenager give a Did the teenager give a sans-culotte a wedgie? Did the old-timer yell, "King me," at too many checkers games? The history books are conspicuously silent on this issue. The splatterfest finally came to an end when Robespierre's policies proved so effective that he became a Republic enemy himself. In July, he was accused of the crimes of dictatorship and tyranny, obviously trumped-up charges. Not having the benefit of Cochrane and Kardashian, he was found guilty, and on July 28th, he followed in the footsteps and head plops of many of his victims, bringing the reign of terror to a welcome end. Unlike Robespierre, who was guillotined face up, hey, who says executioners don't pay attention to the little niceties, and buried in a common grave near what is now Parc Monceau, the other casualties of the Trône massacre were heaped into wagons, hauled off to what used to be a garden of a convent, not far from Nation, and chucked head over heels, or under heels, alongside heels, into long, deep ditches in what is now the Cimetière de Picpus. After the bloodbath, things quieted down somewhat, and France eventually got on with the business of trying to be a republic, which didn't last very long because Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804, and then in 1814, just 20 years after the terror, the Bourbon monarchy was restored. Robespierre must have been rolling over at 2 different speeds in his grave. Meanwhile, France's guillotines were not, unfortunately, dismantled and sold for parts or souvenirs. Dr. Guillotin's gadget continued to be used for executing criminals until 1977 and was officially still on call until 1981, when capital punishment finally got the axe. Of course, no discussion of the guillotine would be complete without mentioning the elephant in the holding cell. The eternal debate as to whether or not the severed head sees the basket coming towards it. Or, to put it less graphically, whether the body-deprived cranium continues to live and think for some speculative, although no doubt brief, period of time after amputation. The consensus seems to be that the brain's neural functions could possibly continue for about a dozen seconds. I researched this. Although the shock of the blow, not, by a home experiment or anything, about a dozen seconds, although the shock of the blow would probably induce what I can only assume would be a merciful state of unconsciousness. Despite its important place in French history, it is no longer possible, as far as I could find out, to see an actual whole guillotine in Paris. There is a real and used blade at the Conciergerie Museum on Ile de la Cité, and another one at the Musée de la Préfecture de Police on Rue de Montagne Sainte-Geneviève. The Police Museum also has a replica, a 1/3 scale model of a guillotine. Not big enough to exterminate a traitor or even a sheep, although it would probably do a pretty good job on a Tickle Me Elmo doll. I, for one, would pay money to see that. Lastly, there's a full-sized, although bodyboardless, topper lopper featured as part of the decor when it's not let out for film shoots at the Guillotine Bar on Rue Galante. I think they use it to zest the limes for the margaritas. Epilogue. In the mid-1880s, the city of Paris issued a call for bids for the construction of a monument on a large patch of grass across from Trocadero, picture this, in preparation for the Universal Exhibition of 1889, the centennial of the Revolution. Many proposals were considered, this is true by the way, then the contract ultimately went to some guy with a kind of a German-sounding name who built this big, tall, steely thingy with an open-work frame and kind of tapering convex contours, that thing. It was a pretty good idea, but get this. One of the rejected proposals was to build, instead of the Eiffel Tower, an enormous, multi-story high replica of the guillotine in honor of the victims of the terror. Think what the skyline of Paris would look like today. Now stop thinking about it and think about the city's image. Instead of being called the City of Light, it would be known today as the City of Persplat, or the City of the Approaching Basket.